Realtis, where we stand for democracy in housing. Today's panel is going to be that's taking place is growing your real estate business by utilizing land banks. That's right. Land always has equal power in America. It always has and always will be. And so we're going to get right into it. Our our person doing the prayer for us today is the great Reverend Todd Yeary, Vice President of the Rainbow Push Coalition. He's also a prominent minister in Baltimore, Maryland. Rainbow Push Coalition is a strategic partner with the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. We are working together to increase the rate of Black home ownership. So without further ado, let's give a Realtist welcome, a virtual welcome with a nice hand clap for Reverend Todd Yeary, Vice President of Rainbow Push Coalition. Reverend Yeary, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Antoine, and to President Williams and to all of the good people at NAREB. It is good to be with you on this, the last day of your annual convention, how important your work is to the cause of social justice and human rights, particularly as it relates to wealth building and housing. And so it is my privilege on behalf of Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson Sr., the founder and president of the Rainbow Push Coalition, to bring you greetings and to offer you words of invocation on this morning. Shall we all bow and shall we pray? God of grace and God of glory, on thy people, pour thy power. These are moments, oh God, where we need your power, we need your presence. More importantly, we need your purpose. We thank you for the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, an organization committed to equity, equality, and justice as they convene on this, the last day of their convention, to educate, empower, and mobilize. We pray, oh God, that for the days leading up to this conclusion, your will has been done. And as the work must begin, as the adjournment draws nigh, we pray that you will encourage our hearts and keep our minds open to the power of the possibilities of this moment. Let us not be discouraged, for your word declares, weep not in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap a harvest if we faint not. We believe harvest season is upon us and darkness is about to give way to day. And so we pray, oh God, that this group, this collective of those committed to justice might be inspired, encouraged, and strengthened to bless your people and do thy will. Keep us now according to the order that you've established for the universe, and we are careful to live our lives intentionally. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Yeary. We appreciate your leadership and we look forward to many things together in the year 2021. We know that there's so much work to do and we can do more together than we can as individuals and individual institutions. Next, we want to bring the man that makes it happen. He is at his podium, our 31st president of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, the largest Black independently owned real estate Black-owned brokerage in the state of New Jersey, also in property management, real estate investing, and some of everything in the state of New Jersey. Our 31st president, Mr. Donnell Williams. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. I appreciate you. Reverend Dr. Yeary, always a pleasure, sir. Always a pleasure. I want my Realtist family to understand the importance of the land bank. In New Jersey, we didn't have a land bank until recently. So I'm understanding the nuances and whatnot, but I need you all to take pen to paper and write down and keep these notes for yourself, because this will undoubtedly impact your life and your business. So please pay careful attention. I urge you to. This is a valuable session. Please stay tuned all day long. as I do have a few important announcements that I will be making throughout the day. So hold on tight and enjoy the ride. Thank you very much.
Mr. Williams, could you introduce the chair, please?
Oh, I apologize. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my longtime standing confidant and friend, broker and managing broker, I do believe, of Exit Property Solutions, is it?
Realty Quality Solutions.
Okay. She is a very capable young lady, very, very capable. I am proud to call her my realtor sister, none other than Michelle Calloway, chair of the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this wonderful panel. Before we get started, I just have a couple of tips to give you. Please be sure to put your greetings and questions when we get to that point in the chat box so that we have someone monitoring that. But we welcome your greetings. We welcome you to put your cameras on so you all can be seen. And it's just going to be a wonderful day. First of all, I want to make clear that we have guests on that are not NAREB members, and we welcome you as also. Here at the NAREB family, what we believe is that homeownership, of course, is the #1 way to close the wealth gap in our country, right? One of the objectives of this session is to develop strategies on how land banks and land trusts can be used to meet our community goals. Goals such as increasing affordable housing and stabilizing our property values and reducing the racial gap in home ownership. So many of us may have heard about land trusts and land banks, but not really know as real estate professionals how they impact us and how we can interface with them. And many of our cities do not even have a land bank or land trust. And so we'll be able to have questions around that. We have the opportunity and the pleasure to have this morning with us Dr. Akilah Watkins Butler. Miss Dr. Watkins Butler is the President and Chief Executive Officer for the Center for Community Progress, which is America's nonprofit leader for turning vacant spaces into vibrant places. Her career's work has focused on helping people, communities, and local and federal government impact reform for key issues, including land banking, property vacancy, child obesity, community health, and economic development. Dr. Watkins Butler has served as the executive leader for nonprofits and community development initiatives, which includes work with the Obama administration, NeighborWorks America, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Center for Study for Social Policy. Dr. Watkins Butler has been doing this type of work for over 25 years. And guess what? She started at 14 years old as an advocate in her community in New York City, Roosevelt, New York, which is out in Queens, Long Island area. She was part of leading an effort to convert a vacant lot and abandoned home into a community center. So this is something that's deep in her soul. And she has parlayed that into becoming, as we said, the president and CEO of the Center for Community Progress. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you, Dr. Butler, for being here with us today. Would you please tell our group a little bit about the Center for Community Progress, a little bit about how you work?
Thank you so much, Ms. Calloway. And let me first start out by saying thank you, Mr. Antoine Thompson, for the invite. Anytime he calls me, I am there. Thank you, Chair Williams, for your remarks opening up today's session. And thank you, Reverend Yuri, for your prayer. I would like to thank all of you all too. It is nice to be on a webinar these days where you can feel the passion and interest in this topic of how do we balance this idea of community revitalization, all the while by making sure that African-American homeownership increases, right? So I think that is such a great intersection to discuss today. And I'm happy and honored to be your guest. And so to your specific question, Ms. Calloway, about the Center for Community Progress, yeah, so we are the only national organization that works primarily on and solely on converting vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties into productive use. And so all over this country, there are many communities that face huge amounts of vacancy. And partly it's because of historical discriminatory practices that all of you clearly know about. When we actually look at the history of redlining in our communities and overlay that with where blight is taking place at now, we see a connection. So I always like to share that because many times in our communities, in our Black communities, people want to blame Black folks for why there's huge amounts of vacancy and blight. And it's not that. It is truly because of historical discriminatory housing practices. And I'm so happy to be talking to organizations like NAREB, who's at their core, their mission is about fighting and repairing that very extractive history that we have around housing and African-American wealth ownership. So we have modernized and amplified the tool of land banking, right? So that's what we're here to talk about today. And so land banks, just to give you a quick overview, they are quasi-government entities, right? So they're usually created with some sort of state enabling legislation. What that means is that an organization can't pop up and say, hey, I'm a land bank. That's not how they work. They are usually created with state enabling legislation. We, as an organization, have been responsible for passage of 15 separate pieces of state legislation. There are about 200 land banks in the country. I'm more than happy, and I'll put my website up in the chat so people can take a look at what states, but states that have the most land banks are Ohio. So it's a really good thing if, you know, where the event will take place, because we can really do some not only site visits, but really kind of bring in some land banking leaders, because Ohio is a major area and has some of the most progressive and self-sustaining state legislation around land banking in the entire country. So it is really, really good. Michigan, New York, and the great state of Georgia. We were talking about Georgia earlier on this call. Those are states that have a deep and entrenched land banking system. And so we are the only national organization that provides technical assistance, capacity building to the country's land banks. And so our goal, our vision is to eliminate blight, right? To get rid of it. We don't ever want to see property that is not being used for the best and highest use of community. And our work is so much about helping communities understand the systems that deeply impact or deeply exacerbate vacancy, abandonment, and blight. And so we'll, if questions come up about, we can go a lot deeper in that. And I can talk to you about the tax foreclosure systems and, code enforcement. And we can talk about how those mechanisms help to exacerbate, especially in contemporary terms, vacancy and blight. But that's the short answer, Ms. Calloway.
So what about if your city or county does not have a land bank, but yet we as real estate professionals, we see all the blight and vacancies, and we're sitting now thinking, wow, how do we find out, A, do we have a land bank? And if we do not, B, question 2, how would we be able to impact that or bring that to the attention of our local government?
So that's a great question. So I'm going to back up to answer, why should you care about a land bank? You know,
Okay.
you are real estate professionals, you know, these are vacant properties. Why should I even care? And part of the reason why you should care is because land banks hold inventory that can be used for homeownership. And so Antoine and I have had hours and hours of conversation around inventory and how inventory is really tight, especially in a lot of our Black cities that are still facing huge amounts of gentrification and displacement. And so land banks can be a tool. They're not a silver bullet. They're not going to help untangle all of the systemic challenges to why we don't have enough inventory in these cities, that we do need to build more affordable housing. But what they can do is they can be a tool, a place, an opportunity for real estate professionals like yourself to actually see if there are any properties available for home ownership. And so that's why you all should care deeply about this. And people in the real estate field do not traditionally think of land banks as an opportunity to acquire property. So, you know, we could talk about some of the cities that have land banks, and I encourage you all to go to our website at www.communityprogress.net. I'll put it in the chat. But for those cities who do not have a land bank, there are a couple of things you can do. One is that you can, for some land banks, many of them, you can buy property even if you're not a resident of that city, right? So if you want it, if you're a real estate professional in, Macon, Georgia, and you wanted to, and let's say you had your real estate license in like a region, you could then tap the land bank in, let's say, Atlanta, or I'm trying to think of states around it, because it's, or maybe in Mobile, right?
Mhm.
So you can buy it. I just want to be clear about that. You don't have to be a resident, or you don't have to be a resident to buy property. The other thing is, if you see a lot of vacant property and you want to make sure this vacant property is being used in the right way, that's why you call organizations like ours, right? So we get about 300 calls in our office every single year. And the vast majority of those calls are, hey, I think we should start a land bank. And sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not. There are some, and so let me just put a fine point to this. So, many communities face a lot of vacancy and blight, and, contacting us so we can get you connected with more education, with more training. It may make sense to do a technical assistance engagement where we actually talk to the local municipal leaders to see what the appetite is. We also do deep legal research because we want to see, has land banking legislation been introduced in this state before? Has it failed? That's the case in a lot of areas. How amenable are folks to, bringing all these properties together? Are there, all those sort of kind of deep legal questions we help to untangle and answer. We got a great team of just legal professionals that work for CCP that does this.
So Keila, Dr.
Please.
Butler. So how would they find out, first of all, if there is a land bank in their community? And then if there isn't, then we can move back to reaching out to Center for Community Progress. How would they even know in the first?
Go on our website. We have a map up. You can see if there's a land bank in your city. So if you just go to our website and, check it out, we have mapped out all of the land banks, and, we, maybe a little off by a couple of weeks because land banks are sprouting up everywhere. But go to our website, you can see. I could tell you this: if you're in Ohio, Michigan, New York State, not downstate, but New York State, and there are reasons why. If you're in Georgia, right? is a great chance that there is a land bank in your area.
Mhm.
Doesn't just mean, I mean, there's a land bank in Mobile, right? Alabama, right? They don't have them all over the state, but there is one. Um, we're working right now to look at doing one in Kentucky, right? And around the state of Kentucky, which will include Louisville. So there are conversations happening right now about new land banks coming on, coming on board. But to find out today, go to our website, take a look at it, see if your community is, identified as a place that has a land bank.
So I'm thinking, as realtors, once we look on your site to find out whether there's a land bank, and let's assume we're in a city that there isn't. Well, it seems like for us as realtors, we could be the advocates to even get a conversation going, because we could, if there isn't one, we don't have to wait on someone else to figure it out. We could actually come to you, and maybe you would be able to show those realtors in those cities how to approach their local government and other advocates to see whether there is an appetite to be able to take part of the education, training, or technical support. Would you say that's correct? That we might see this blight wherever we're at. We see there's no land bank, and we don't have to sit there and be depressed about it. There can be something we do.
Absolutely, absolutely. We don't have to be victims, right? We do not have to be passive. We get calls from residents all the time, just regular folks that are like, you know what, I'm tired of walking past this abandoned building. We get calls from police chiefs that are just frustrated because they keep getting called to the same building over and over again, right? Because they're like, we don't know who owns this and we don't know what to do. Help us. So it doesn't matter who's the spark. We the only thing that we do want to be clear about is we want to make sure that the community wants it, right? That there, because we're going to need local government. We're going to need we're going to need the mayor. We're going to need the tax assessor, county attorney. We're going to need these folks to want to be bought in on the process. So whoever is the spark is who is, whatever that is. But in terms of how the ball rolls, and we need a very kind of diverse group of local stakeholders at the table to get this done. Because let me be clear about land banks, like they're really powerful. They're not just about acquiring property. So what happens in a lot of communities is that, especially weak and moderate market communities, is that a lot of these properties aren't able to, enter into the affordable housing or housing realm because they owe so much back taxes. They may have liens against them. They may have code violations. Levied on the property. Like, these properties are buried under a lot of debt, and so it makes it unattractive to any investor that wants to come in and buy these properties. So what a land bank does is that it wipes all that out. It wipes all that out. And it's able to get a clean deed, right? So a lot, to go a little bit down a rabbit hole, a lot of these properties don't have a clean deed. We gotta figure out who owns it. Sometimes, grandma passes, and the property can serve as almost like a community home, right? And like the deed is not really clear. Well, who owns it now? And there may be like several cousins living in. We got to come in and if there's not an heir properties organization, we got to come in and help untangle all that. So that's why land banks they can be a very powerful tool, because let me be clear, we don't want any Black family, first of all, to ever lose any wealth that they generate over generations. So that's the first thing. So as we untangle these property mysteries, we want to make sure if this property belongs to a family, especially a Black family, we want to make sure that property gets back to them. But if the property is just abandoned and not being taken care of and an eyesore and a danger, we also want to make sure that property gets into really good stewardship. So it doesn't matter who's the catalyst. It's really, but land banks in and of themselves are very powerful tools because of that. Some of these properties are, you're wiping out not million, but thousands, tens of thousands of dollars of back liability on these properties. That is part of the reason why we always want to make sure that whoever these properties are transferred to, that they are doing it for the right reasons, right? That they have a double bottom line, that it's about, okay, being profitable, but it's also about being responsible to community. So as we transition to other questions, but yeah.
Well, on that note, since we're talking about many of the properties are over leveraged and other things that happen, maybe they've been blighted, abandoned, and all of that. So are we thinking that the majority of properties that come into the land bank, they're going to be sold to investors and not future homeowners? How would we as real estate professionals, realtors, help our client? What's our target client for the land bank properties? Investors mostly?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And so let me say this. Land banks are not under any pressure to get the highest price for a property. I mean, that profitability is not their major goal or their primary goal. Their primary goal is about how do they use, or how can this land be leveraged for the best and highest use of the community. So I definitely want to point that out. And so what that means is that no, most land banks would not necessarily sell to an investor, like some LLC that wants to come and like buy up like 50 or 60 properties or 100 properties. Now, I'm not saying it never has happened, but usually they don't, because you know, some of the challenges with these LLCs coming in and buying kind of like, doing these wholesale properties, is that they're not located in the community, don't have the community's best interests at heart. A lot of times they're holding property, or they're not making the necessary updates and renovations so families can live in those properties as renters, or, so they in some ways are, help to kind of continue the cycle of blight and vacancy, because when a property gets too expensive to upkeep and they never really put the money in the first place, like it can easily be then returned back to the land bank, right? So that is why land banks, as a general practice, aren't that excited or don't usually sell properties wholesale to like LLC investors. Now, in terms of real estate professionals buying property from land banks, I actually think if you have a land bank in your community, you should call them up. You should actually let them know that you're here as a resource. If the land bank get certain properties that you think would be really good, I mean solid single family properties, that they give you an opportunity to really make sure that an African American family gets an opportunity to buy that.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that is a way to go. Or I will invite you all, like a lot of land banks have MLS listings as part, of their website. Go online and see what is being offered to the general public. See if there's an opportunity for your constituents, your clients to participate and buy. I will say this though, on the downside, and I'm totally not a Debbie Downer, but I do want to caution us, is that a lot of the properties that come into the land bank need extensive renovation, right? Very rarely do land banks get like properties in great condition. So, and that's okay. I mean, if you get a property in the city center of some of these communities, some people love a full, like rental project, but they do come with that. A lot of those properties do come and they need a lot of renovation dollars. I mean, they need a lot of renovation. And the other challenge, and I know, Michelle, I'm probably moving into another place here, but I just need to be clear with all of you. One other challenge is really around mortgaging these properties,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and it's not, So this is the irony, and I'm going to let you know what we're working on as a national organization. And Antoine and I are part of this conversation that's happening. Is that a lot of financial institutions, banks, do not have a mortgage product really for homes that are like 100,000 and less, right? So when we talk about markets like a Cleveland market, or even a Macon, Georgia, even though the South is just rising, boy, these prices are just out of control down there. But when we talk about, a market like Louisville, who is mortgaging these properties that are 120 or 80,000, and it's really difficult. Sometimes some of the smaller regional banks are available to provide mortgages. If you're lucky and you have a CDFI in your community development financial institution, maybe possibly they can provide some financing to your families to be able to get this property. But because these properties are so deeply undervalued and many times under market, it's just really hard to get financing for them. And that means purchase finance, and that means renovation finance. So what we're doing, and Antoine and I are part of this kind of larger group around Black home ownership, is we are trying to have, or trying to identify and bring in financial institutions that are willing to come up with mortgage products for this market of 150 and below. Because right now we don't have it. We don't have it. We talk a lot about jumbo loans. We got, markets heating up. But for a homeowner that needs a $50,000 loan, most banks don't want to finance that over 30 years.
Absolutely not. They will not. In most markets, you're absolutely right. We've been having that problem for years. And you answered several questions I had, which was around products like the FHA 203K. But once again, even if that property would have to value much higher, after repair value, and then it can only have specific type of repairs needed. Even the full 203K, it cannot be something that's almost need to be demolished, rebuilt. So I was at your event last year, live event, around not getting rid of blight, vacant spaces, vibrant places. And there were some programs introduced, I think in Texas, Houston, where and maybe even Ohio, a few places that homeowners could buy directly from the land bank. And then there were programs, but they had to buy it cash. And then there was some other program for them, a sweat equity program. But that means that land bank has to create a program. Is that what we would look for to help our clients to take advantage of that? The buyer, the homeowners to take advantage direct?
No, so that's a great question. Yeah, so homeowners can buy directly from the land banks. They can go online. A lot of them have MLSs. When you're talking about the Detroit Land Bank, which is very, very sophisticated, they always have their properties listed, and they have properties of roughly like 90,000 properties. So they're always getting properties on, selling them, that sort of stuff. So some land banks have huge amounts of inventory. So I will say this: yes, direct your clients to the MLSs of land banks. The challenge is going to be around those renovation dollars. Even if they weren't able to purchase the property at $10,000 or $20,000, I mean, some of these purchase prices are well below market value, and some of these markets are extremely weak. When you talk about places like Michigan, who has hot, moderate, and very, very weak markets, like the Saginaw Land Bank, right? Do you have clients that are willing to pay? I mean, they can get something almost at transactional cost, right? So, but the challenge is going to be, where do you get these loans? And yes, the 203K loan from the federal government could be an option. It's probably one of the best we got. Some land banks do provide finance options for renovation. Some do. If you were in Syracuse, New York, Syracuse is one of those markets that do provide, some sort of additional dollars for renovation. But a lot don't. So that's a gap and a challenge in the market. There just isn't a lot of resources for renovation. So even if you got the property in a
Right.
Detroit for $10,000, but it needed another 75,000. Well, Detroit is a little different because Detroit has programs like the home program that is ran by both public and private investors that helps homeowners that want to stay in the city and build and pour resources and renovate a project. But I'm talking about like other areas like a Saginaw or Flint or places like that. It's very, very difficult, to be honest, because and part of the challenge is that renovation costs are pretty much the same, right? A sheetrock costs what sheetrock costs.
Right.
So, and it costs that way in Michigan, it costs that way in Florida, it costs that way in New Mexico. So that's part of the challenge, is that a lot of these homes are so deeply discounted. Talk about a Gary, Indiana, and the type of money it's going to take to get them renovated so a family can live there and flourish exceeds it exceeds the worth of the house, right? So it's not enough equity in the house, which is why it's hard to get these loans from financial institutions. But this is the sixth cycle we're in. If we don't get this money from financial institutions, then some communities never develop, right? They never will come back. So I think that is such a very vicious cycle. There are, and I'll talk about this later on. There are some initiatives going on to help homeowners that do have negative equity, and and I'm more than happy to talk about them right now because they will be presented in the 117th Congress, and that can maybe help some of our struggling homeowners that want to stay in these very important cities. Let me just say this: we see how important it is for us to be in Michigan, for us to be in the Milwaukees of the damn world. And we don't need our people leaving those cities. I mean, they leave if they want to, but we don't need our people leaving those cities because they can't find decent housing. Because we saw and we continue to see the importance of those cities and what they do to the political landscape of this country and what they do for the African American community. So we are working hard, leaders like Antoine and I, to push for federal legislation like the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, which I'm more than happy to talk to you all about, that will help homeowners mitigate negative equity. And that negative equity shows up so much in African American communities. And so we are working our butts off. And this is why it's important to have Black leadership at the table, because we want to bring the urgency of this issue to policy tables. So I'm sorry a little bit for the rant there, but this is life and death. We have seen what happens when we don't do this.
Absolutely. No. And thank you because you're answering a lot of the questions that I know people have. Thank you for that. And we need to understand where we fit in the advocacy side of this, right? And how this fits into government policy, because oftentimes we separate these things. I have some more tactical questions for you. Some people in the chat room are asking if you can, I don't know if this is in your space, explain the difference. They want to know, is an opportunity zone similar to the land bank?
No. So that's a great question. I did see it come up in the chat.
Yes.
I also will say I invite you all to, hit me up on Twitter too. This conversation never has to end. I put my Twitter handle on there. It's Dr. Akila WB. Please hit me up on Twitter. Opportunity zones were created in the last year as a community revitalization tool, allegedly. And what it does is that it allows capital to sit for multiple years, for like 6 or 7 years, right? And in that time, investors can invest in real estate deals and projects, specifically in communities that are low and moderate income. And these investors do not have to pay taxes or dividends on this money until their time is up, and the time is going to be up in like 6 years from now, right? So they can keep the returns on the money that they've made in the 6 years. So I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm probably not the best person to talk to about opportunity zones because I'm a little skewed. But that is the basic kind of business model around it. Like parking capital for multiple years, make all the money you can from it, and you can keep it. Okay. And so the money is really supposed to be about how do we catalyze economic development in communities, right? And especially communities of color, because most opportunity zones are in communities of color. Now, what we have seen with opportunity zones is that a lot of the development that's happening, a lot of investors are attracted to communities that were on the cusp of being gentrified. So if you were located, let's say in Grand Rapids, Michigan, like all the communities that kind of like line Grand Rapids, right, would be primed for opportunity zone investment. And if you were in DC, where I'm at, communities that like a Seat Pleasant, Maryland, is primed, okay, is primed. Okay, College Park, if you were in Atlanta, it would be College Park. Like it's prime. It hits up right there on the Atlanta border. And so the challenge is that places that deeply need investment aren't getting investment. They're not getting the patient capital of these investors. Okay, investors want to make money. Okay, so they want to, like, they got 6-7 years to make all the money they can and can keep that. It can keep those, those returns. They trying to go where they're gonna get the highest return for their dollar. So they're gonna go to places that are as close to those kind of like huge economic engines as they possibly can, and that's what we are finding in the opportunity zone world, right? And so that is why it's not a true tool for revitalization, and in many ways it becomes an exacerbator of gentrification and displacement. And so that is part of the challenge. I'll say in full disclosure, I made a decision a long time ago that we weren't going to use this tool because we just felt like it could be dangerous for a lot of our communities. And I'm not trying to bring danger to our communities at all. Our communities have suffered way too much historically. They do not need me bringing tools to them that could be used to hurt and for more Black folks to be losing their property. So that's why we didn't do it. Versus a land bank. A land bank is very different. So a land bank actually exists in a lot of weak market cities. In some ways, it actually helps to correct the market forces, right? So a city is very weak, or a city is going through huge economic development like in Atlanta, and there were whole parts of Atlanta that weren't getting developed. Not till now, because they done ran out of all this space. And so a land bank can actually help stabilize markets, hold land until a community can figure out what do they want to do with it. It can slow down gentrification and displacement. And so there's a very strong land bank in places like Atlanta. And and I could talk ad nauseum about the work that they're doing. And they're actually working very closely with Community Land Trust, which is a whole nother tool that I'm more than happy to talk about if you guys are interested in that.
Absolutely. So another question, thank you for that. Would land banks be apt to sell lots of properties to churches, where churches could get private funding, private lenders, which was another point people were bringing up, to deal with the aspect of not being able to get the traditional lending? But first of all, churches to be an entity that land banks sell to, the church is getting private funding, private lending to be able to renovate and sell directly to the community. What about that strategy?
Yeah. So churches, so there's some land banks that work very closely with churches because a lot of churches are community development corporations, right? So they do development. They're able to pull on private equity in a lot of creative ways. And so land banks, can work out a transfer deal to religious organizations where they get them and they're able to provide affordable housing. Now, the religious institution has to be deeply committed to and committed to providing affordable housing. I cannot tell you all the how many people I have to say no to every day that call our office and want to know, how can I get these properties for almost nothing so I can, pour some money in and I can sell them for like $400,000 and $500,000. That's not what we into. We don't do that. We don't do that. We need to make sure that anybody, financial institutions included, that can have access to a pipeline of these properties, that they do it for the good of the community. We want to make sure that our folks, our families are getting into properties that they can afford, that are healthy for them, that are going to revitalize our communities. And so churches are absolutely great partners when they have centered, okay, when they've centered Black vitality, when they've centered that, they're wonderful partners. The other thing that we've done, a lot of land banks in Atlanta pioneered this, the Fulton County Land Bank, is that a lot of churches were using or working with land banks to place their properties into land banks. Because while a property's in a land bank, it doesn't have to pay property taxes, doesn't, it's a lot, it's
Mhm,
economically
mhm,
advantageous for them to place their
mhm,
properties in land banks, especially when a lot of churches were going through hard economic times, right? And
mhm.
so land banks would hold property up to 5 years. And in that time, they can save on the property taxes, because we don't want land lost to
Mhm.
the tax foreclosure system at all. And so, and that land and that religious institution had to make a commitment that when they receive that land back, that, yeah, we're going to use this land to help our parishioners and the community. And so that is something that the Fulton County Land Bank has pioneered, where they actually bank land for up to 5 years, for entities, a lot of them being religious entities. And I will say this, that may be an option that we look at in 2021, because look, we're scared it may be an economic, you know, meltdown, shutdown after COVID. And so all this property that we are gaining institutionally now, we don't want to lose that. We lost $9 billion in the last economic crisis in the 2000s. I mean, that's with Black folks. That's not with
I
America.
know.
That's just what we did. 9 billion we lost, or 9 trillion, I'm sorry, in wealth. And we don't ever want that to happen again. So that is why I think land banks are a really good tool to hold land, so we don't lose any of our kind of institutional land to the tax foreclosure system.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You answered so many questions in one. What I will say though, we've had some comments in the chat that some of the places that there are land banks that seem to be robust land banks, that they have found that it's difficult as realtors, real estate agents to penetrate that and work with them, because it appears that a little cronyism may be occurring with the properties that are decent. They're selling them to investors they already know. And then the less desirable ones are there. So how can they talk to you guys about it? Like, what do they do after the land bank exists and they see these type of things happening? Is there any recourse?
Yeah, that's a great point, and you're probably right. So let me just be clear about that. There are, actors, people always acting naughty in all types of fields, and land banking is no different. And so what I've done is I'm creating a national land bank network. So this is, and I'm going down this road because a network that can both provide kind of capacity building, technical assistance. It can share best and most promising practices, but it also will distribute federal dollars, right? So we currently have written a piece of legislation. It has been introduced in the House Bill 7103. It is. We're also working on legislation in the Senate now. Um, Antoine has been extremely supportive of this piece of legislation, this National Land Bank Network legislation. I bring that up because the only way we're going to change practice is being able to distribute some dollars so we can set the parameters for what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, right? So, we're doing something real different in the land banking world now. A lot of land banks were doing great work. They have, really gone into places that a lot of people have just ignored, and they've done God's work. But the challenge is that, a lot of the work has been really transactional. And so my leadership as a Black woman running this organization is really moving past the transactional to the transformational. Like, how can we transform communities? And part of that is about building different relationships. A lot of land bank leaders are white. That's just,
Yep.
let me be clear. And
Absolutely.
networks are very racially siloed. And so the deal is, especially white networks. I mean, our networks have to look a little bit more diverse because, we're not the, dominant members of power in society. But so the deal is that we are working at least at a national level to broaden these networks, right? They need to know about NAREB and NAREB needs to know about land bank. So just so you know, Antoine and I, before COVID struck, we were getting ready to do some sort of kind of multi-city tour, weren't we, Antoine? And really begin to build relationships at a city level between the realtist and the land bank leaders, right? And so COVID happened. We got to go back to that work, and it's gonna be that's gonna be part of it. So yeah, a lot of these land bank leaders, some of them they probably do have, like I said, um, networks that they're kind of passing, kind of like cherry picking some of the best properties for. We're gonna have to change that. We're gonna change that through legislation. We're gonna change that through distributing dollars, because by distributing dollars, now we're able to, in some ways, be more assertive about what are some of the best and most promising practices, right? Like, if we want to increase Black home ownership, which is on everybody's hearts and minds today,
Yes.
let me be honest about it. How we do that, working with organizations like NAREB, is one of the ways we do that. So
Absolutely.
it's going to take a lot of, reconstituting. It's going to take a lot of incentivizing to do things differently. It's going to take the relationship building that Antoine and I really were working on this year before COVID disrupted all of that. We're going right back to it. We're going right back to it because y'all need to know who are the land bank leaders in the community, and the land bank leaders need to know who y'all are.
Correct. Dr. Watkins Butler, we have come to an end of our time. You and I, we get together and we talk for hours. So, and the questions in the chat room, they want to talk for hours. So obviously you have already said you're willing to come back and talk again. This is not a 1 hour conversation. So we will for sure get you back in 2021 and hold additional chats like this to go into we can get the questions that we have here that we may not have been able to address. You did cover a lot, but we will come back, everyone. We promise you in 2021, we will get Dr. Akilah Watkins Butler back and talk further, even go into a little bit more understanding about the land trust relationship with the land bank and more of what we can do. So our time is up. We have another panel coming in, and I just want to thank you for your willingness, as usual, to be here and share and educate. And I know you've seen some of the comments here in chat. So it is robust. You see, we got to get you back early 2021, right?
Thank
So
you
we
so
know we
much.
have marching
Thank you so much,
orders.
Michelle. I appreciate
Thank you.
Antoine, and thank you all for this time today. This is important.
Thank you for sharing with us. Everyone have a great day. We do have we have a boot camp. We have the Entrepreneurial Enterprise Boot Camp at 1 p.m. Please join us back. Mr. Thompson, are you still here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I want to say just a couple quick things. First, Dr. Watkins, we have a lot of work to do in 2021. So much to do. I know some of our folks say, I thought this was going to 12:30, but we're going to give everybody a little break. And we're going to let everybody get a little break so you can be ready for 1 o'clock. But Akila, one thing I wanted to mention to you that you kind of tapped on a little bit. And I want to put this out there for all the realtors to understand, because this is not just a job, it's a cause for us. This is a cause. This is so right now, Black home ownership is as Akila said, everybody's talking about it. And with realtors, what we have to do is we have to be very engaged, because we got to make sure that Black voices that are not just Black faces, but Black conscious voices are at the table, because the Black faces that are conscious are the same as Black conscious voices and faces that know what time it is, that know what the community needs, and not just taking this up as a hobby. Right? Because it's in season. And so a couple of years ago, we had this whole thing with the police, police violence. That's out now. We had all the school shootings, and people wanted to do all this stuff around gun violence, and all these groups got money, and now Black people still dying in the streets, and the groups that have been out there are still out there. And so now that we're talking about racial equity through home ownership, it's imperative realtors from all over the country that we broaden our horizon in terms of reaching out to diverse groups to make sure that if you hear about a meeting, that as Shirley Chisholm would say, if you ain't at the table, pull up a chair. Because can't nobody talk about Black home ownership like realtors can. If you hear about a meeting, your chapter wasn't invited, show up, because we got the message. We know what needs to be done. Don't be offended by it. You say, hey, they must didn't get the memo. So we got to show up. We need more Black property managers, more Black builders. We don't want everyone else building the houses in the neighborhoods that we live in and do business in. You got all these white builders building in Black neighborhoods, and very few Black agents and brokers are the ones selling them. The same thing, providing the financing for them. And so it's an avalanche of resources and discussion that's coming right now. That's happening right now. And we got to make sure that Black thought leaders, Black practitioners, Black organizations like NAREB is at the table. And if they're not at the table, shame the devil. We have to tell people, we have to call them on the carpet. Sometimes you got to be nice, and sometimes you got to be in their face. But if we are not at the table, we will be spectators as people talk about and plan for our community. And it's always happened, and it's up to us to change it right now. Thank you. And I'll turn it yield my time back to Jill Harrison. Thank you.
No, you were preaching. Preach. Mr. Thompson, thank you so much. Dr. Akila Watkins Butler, you're a friend of ours and we're a friend of yours. I put her link in the chat, so reach out to her. I put her Twitter handle in the chat, so please hit her up and just share her tweets. We look forward to everyone coming back. As Madam Calloway and Mr. Thompson said, 1 o'clock, we're going to have an entrepreneurial enterprise boot camp. teach you how to be a Black hotel owner or developer, or teach you how to own a corporate franchise, how to be a franchisee. Amazing speakers, Mr. Omari Head and Mr. Kevin Hicks. Let's also remember to patronize and thank our 2020 partners. We have multiple of them, 35 of them, as you see on the graphic. And we'll be highlighting more of them as the day goes by. So go grab you some lunch, breakfast, whatever time zone you're in, and we'll see you back in just about 54 minutes, okay? Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Watkins Butler.